Come journey through the corridors of life, creating an environment of love and spiritual growth. Trinity TV, that you may have life.
Well, good evening and welcome to episode 6 in our 8-part series on living nonviolence here on Trinity TV. I'm Andy Johnson. In this episode, we want to look at the dynamic of cultivating nonviolence at my workplace. That is essentially because at the center of our discussions here, we wish to maintain the overriding objective that nonviolence begins with me. Our guests for this discussion is Suzanne Morgan, a corporate citizen and a member of the Nonviolence Committee of the Living Water Community. Back with us, Diane Job, HR consultant and a representative of the Franciscan Institute, and my good friend Terence Walker, corporate citizen and a former Trinidad and Tobago diplomat and foreign service officer. As usual, we invite you in the audience to engage with us via our Facebook platform, and you can call us when you see the number come up on the screen. We hope you enjoy the next hour. Well, let me begin by reading a story which has some elements of violence about it, and in it, you determine. It's taken in today's Express newspaper. The Guardian, I'm sorry. Police officers attached to the Sangre Grande Court and Process Unit were attacked late yesterday by prisoners who threw feces and urine at them from within the court's holding cell at the Sangre Grande police station. The prisoners, most of whom were murder accused, allegedly began throwing feces and urine at officers as they returned with prisoners from the nearby magistrate's court. The prisoners then set fire to toilet paper and pieces of sponge. The officers had to run for cover and called for backup. However, officers then refused to attempt to quell the situation in the cells, noting the unhealthy and unsafe situation. But when the fire in the cell got worse, the police called the fire service for assistance. A team of officers from the Sangre Grande station arrived and quickly put out the fire and washed down the cell. By this time, the street was filled with curious onlookers. While this was taking place, prisoners who had returned from the Rio Claro and Mayaro magistrates' courts became restless and began to use obscene language at the police until they were quieted by officers from the Eastern Task Force. Reliable sources says the trouble began when prisoners asked officers attached to the holding cell to purchase cigarettes for them, and they turned them down. Some of the prisoners began to knock the walls and then lit fire along the corridor in the holding cells. The staff refused to enter when feces and urine were thrown at them. Police sources also confirmed about 10 murder accused started the disorderly behavior. Court matters yesterday went until 5 p.m., and this also agitated the prisoners, as some of them remained in the holding cells all day and did not go before the magistrate. Police officers were later forced to put some of the prisoners in separate vehicles to take them back to prison. Police said they will be putting in more security measures for today's court session, since the prisoners should not have had either lighters or matches to start the fires. Well, that is an incident talking about violence of a sort on the workplace. I see this violence against the police officers. Can we use that to begin this discussion about violence in the workplace? My question to either of you who will take it, do we first believe that this ended as how it is reported here, or did the police not attempt to beat the life out of some of these prisoners because of that? Diane Joe, you want to take that?
Let's start with Diane Joe.
I mean, what do you suspect might have gone on?
Probably there was one policeman in the background praying or something. We hope so. We hope so.
But this is
I hope he, you know, I hope they didn't beat the life out of the prisoners. It must have been really tough for them to start with. I mean, you're reading the story, and I am thinking, and you ended up asking the question, or the article asked the question at the end. Wow, they had access to lighters, and they also had access to urine and feces.
Yeah.
So it really, that
How did they come by those
speaks
things?
to the conditions in which these prisoners are kept. Inhumane to start with. And they must be feeling, well, we didn't get our regular release of, you know, a little cigarette or something, so we have a right. And that's when inhumane conditions exist to start with. It's really difficult to grapple with anything else. You know, these things need to be put in order before we start wondering how did the policemen react and so on. In the moment, it must really have been a terrible thing.
Yeah, so they may have
Nicely
been,
reported,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, but Terry, yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, certainly.
I know that you have to read your story, but perhaps a court or a prison is not a typical workplace. I would want to think that is a very untypical workplace, and there's a deep-seated confrontation that happens in that environment, and I would want to think that the expression of grievance was a deep-seated one on the part of the prisoners.
Of the prisoners.
Yeah.
But I mean, you say it's not a deep sea, it's not a typical workplace, but for police officers it is.
It
right?
is, yes.
And the question is, how would you advise police officers not to retaliate in a case like that?
Well, the situation is one in which a prison officer has to retaliate because he has to have a certain degree of discipline there. So that I'm thinking that apart from the reaction of the prisoners, there's also a lack of discipline in that situation, and that kind of thing doesn't happen in the short or medium term. It's a long term.
Susan, look at it from the point of view of an indignity being meted out to someone on the job, and you're telling somebody, well, you don't have to respond in kind.
Right, I think, Andy, this is an excellent example because it shows the most extreme conditions that can happen in a workplace. And who says that's not actually happening now in our workplaces in Trinidad and Tobago? Maybe it could be, but it's not being reported by our workers. I mean, people come to work probably late, they suffer from a little road rage, they come into the office, they lash out, like our prisoners are lashing out. What does the manager do? Does the manager lash back with some anger management? Do they call in HR? What does HR do? Write on a timesheet that I've come in late. Me as the employee, I get a little more angry again. And that mirrors what the prisoners are doing. I mean, they're a little more extreme, I agree, and less disciplined. But even in the workplace, perhaps we are doing the same thing as managers and as leaders, and we are not looking at the environment in which we have our managers and our employees, and how are we creating a harmonious environment for everyone to work in and feel comfortable. And I think that's what did not happen at our police station, sorry, and I'm not sure if it's actually happening in our workplaces as well.
Right, so let's talk about how it should happen. Let's begin to talk about how it should happen.
Okay, well, I think from the top, we need to have a workplace violence prevention plan. And I am not sure that management, when they start the year and they have a strategic plan and we have our budgets that set out our profits and where we're getting our revenues from, are we looking at our employees and are we looking at our workplace to see how are we dealing with workplace violence prevention? It is prevalent in our society. We read it in the newspaper every day of things that are happening at different places. And I think from the start, we need to have this plan in place. We then need to train everyone in our workplace as to how to deal with confrontational situations, because these are going to arise every day, every moment, every hour, if not with our fellow employees, with our customers, because in some environments our customers come in and they can be abusive to us, and how us as the employees, and how do we deal with that? No different to what happened in that police station. So I think that's key at the top. We have to start from the top. One person at a time is our motto at Nonviolence Begins With Me, but we need to have a plan of how to deal with it. We have to think a little differently now.
And without a plan, Diane, and you still want to be able to talk with people about not, let's stay with that point about not responding in kind to whatever provocations that may come your way or my way. So how do you tell people, forget the environment, forget what is happening around you? The best approach is not to fight fire with fire, as they say.
Not to lash out.
Yeah, it's easier when the work conditions are addressed, where you have managers being empathetic, where you have them not abusing power. When the context is a tough one, it's a tough thing to say to an employee, well, do not fight fire with fire. I mean, you're in a fire. The place is, London is burning. So it really starts with the conditions. Managers, people who are in position of power, need to go back and ask, where is it happening in the workplace? Violence against the employees that we can start addressing. What situations we can address, and then you're forced to look at, what are you doing as an individual that is, I'm abusing my power, I'm showing favoritism in one part, to one person, and, piling on the work for another person, that type of thing. These are the things that are done on the top end that makes it really difficult for employees to do anything other than explode. And when someone reacts to them, does something to them, they then react with even more fire.
I mean, you would have lots of experiences of situations not necessarily similar to this, but the question of people feeling and being violated in one way or the other, whether it's physically, whether it's non-verbally, verbally, attitudinally, Terence.
I think I would make a distinction between large businesses and small ones. I think at this time, most large-scale businesses would have a corporate culture which discourages, and that would be, you would have ground rules, and that's stated up front in the tenets of the corporation. But outside of that, one would have to look into how do you implement structures to drill down? Do you have regular meetings? For example, at Atlantic, where I presently work, we have a focus on safety, and we have regular meetings on safety. We don't have regular meetings on nonviolence, but there are many avenues through which these can be addressed. We have a nurse on staff. We don't have a psychologist as yet, and maybe that would be something that one would want to have moving forward, to have a company psychologist that would address this issue on an ongoing basis.
Because I think management and even employees, we need to actually look at why we're doing what we're doing. What is the root cause? In the last show, a caller called in to say, it's all right to talk about solutions, but we have to understand really why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we being violent, or why are we being non-violent, for example? And when we understand the root cause of why an employee, why a customer, or why management is doing what it's doing, perhaps that might help us understand what policies we need to put in place. Do we need one psychologist, two psychologists? Do we need in our training not only to discuss safety, but anger management? How do I deal with anger management when I haven't got the promotion that you got? I feel I should get it. You shouldn't have gotten that promotion, and therefore I vex. and because I vex, I'm going to lash out at you, as you say, maybe the silent treatment, I don't help you, I gossip about you, I write all sorts of awful emails, I take a picture of you in a compromising position and I circulate and I make you the laughing stock because I am upset I didn't get the promotion. But was I deserved that promotion? Am I looking at myself and saying, well, hey, Susan, maybe you didn't perform to how you should have performed, and accept you need to improve, but don't blame someone else.
Right.
Look at yourself.
And that's the question. That's the heart of the question.
Exactly.
How do you encourage a person to see things that way, even if their feelings are justified?
And I think this is where a good human resource department comes in, or as you say, a good corporate culture comes in. So it inculcates that I understand why I did not get that promotion. That rather than hearing that all of a sudden you get a nice office, you get a nice car, and then I am still in this little cubbyhole thinking I'm working hard, but maybe I'm not really working hard on company business. I'm maybe working hard on my business because I'm on Facebook half the time, I'm on the phone, I'm pretending to work, but I'm on the phone doing WhatsApps and all these kind of things that may be going on in the workplace. And that is, people do not look at that as violent behavior, but it is against company policy. When you're at work, you're not supposed to be doing these things, for example, in the workplace. Yeah. So it's looking at it from the two sides, the company side as well as the employee side.
Yeah, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, the structures that Terry was referring to, and I'm using your promotion example, what relates directly to that is structures that does proper performance appraisals to start with, where there's feedback and the process isn't shrouded by, you go ahead, I'll have a time to do your performance appraisal and I will suck it to you, and bad things are documented against you, as opposed to feedback about what you're doing well, what you can improve on, that type of thing. So people in a system where those structures are in place tend not to feel put upon when someone else is promoted. It's crystal clear. And when it's not done appropriately, there's a grievance process in place as well. So there are many, many structures and substructures that can be put in place that would help.
And the performance, that's a very good point you're raising, because the performance appraisal doesn't necessarily have to be manager of employee. It can be employee of manager. Yeah. And some of management may not like to hear that, in fact, they may be the cause of the violence that's going on, and we all have to correct ourselves at all levels if we want very positive workplaces to be in.
Yeah. But yeah,
the performance appraisal system is, I think, a typical system where closeted bullying takes place. And I would make a distinction there between the public service, where I worked for several decades, and the private sector. In the public service, it tends to cut one way. It tends to be top-down. In the private sector, it cuts both ways, and you have to have conversations about why you've given someone a certain grade, and they can grade you. In that way.
What do you call 360, them kind of things?
And it has to cut both ways. A person should have the opportunity to comment in detail on the appraisal and the appraiser.
Yeah. So that's fine in the perfect world, or in the approach to the perfect world. But we're talking here in the situation where these things don't exist, and you are trying to encourage somebody, again, staying at that point, not to lash back in the way that you feel violated and offended.
Well, I think one of the things certainly I learned at Nonviolence is anger management, because it's very easy to lash out, and I don't like what's happening. I mean, we were reflecting today with one of my staff that worked with me many years ago when I was very violent, and I was upset. I threw a hand of bananas at him, and it flew all over the place.
Ripe or green?
And and then, I mean, we laugh about it now, but I mean, this is a serious issue. I could have had something a little more dangerous today that I threw. But so it taught me anger management. How do we all get angry? Maybe anger is a good thing, Diane. It's an emotion we have to express, but we have to know how to control it. That if I'm upset, I take a deep breath. Do I need to walk away from the situation? And I think that even if we don't have the performance appraisals in place, we don't have the structures, we can teach these little basic things of how to deal with each other.
So how did you handle it? How did you know
how did I throw the banana?
No, the thinking that you had behind it. How were you seized of the fact that you should not have done that? And
because afterwards I felt guilty, because I thought, wait now, how could I have thrown a hand up? I mean, how could I have thrown something, let's say something, to someone because that person didn't do what I wanted? Who said what I wanted is right? At that time, maybe it was the correct thing to do, but not necessarily at that time, because that person could not have delivered what I wanted at that time. So a lot of self-reflection took place. But Andy, in the difficult world outside, when you're vexed, huh? So that self-evaluation may not take place at that time.
Yeah,
but even with anger, you can have violence and harassment.
Yeah. But we're trying to
you don't have to lash out.
To encourage people.
It can be premeditated.
Not to act on instinct, even in the worst situations.
Yeah.
So I guess a little yoga, a little meditation, those little soft issues, Diane. I don't know if that's something people can do in the busy workplace now.
Oh, absolutely. The training in advance really helps. People are amazed when you have them highlight, you ask, how does your body react when you see yourself getting violent? And they identify it. So first of all, being able to identify it. So you do that in a non-threatening situation when you're relaxing and you have people recognize these are some of the things they might see in their bodies. And you teach them, well, when you catch, and then you ask another question. How do you deal with violence, or anger rather? And some people often breathe or walk away or whatever, and make it comfortable in the environment for somebody when they see themselves, starting to breathe short or breaking a sweat or with this pain at the back of your neck or whatever it is. Say, and make it tolerable in the environment. Say, please, I can't have this discussion now. All right, we will have to have it in 5 minutes, please.
That's right.
And you're able to walk away and, take a breather or a drink of water or whatever. But we have to make that type of reaction okay in the environment. A boss can say, you're walking away from me? It could just make it worse for the person. So we have to make it okay. To feel angry is okay. But you have to learn to cope or to deal with it and then respond, because it's going to be worse for everyone.
Exactly. Yeah, you made a simple point there, and sometimes when you take this, Terry, people tell us that, but we say these things. It's easier said than done. Right. Taking a deep breath, counting from 1 to 10. Have you found that sometimes these things work for yourself?
They work. I'm not the type of person to get angry, but I've seen them work. You can talk somebody down. I think it's an issue of training. Unfortunately, in our system, managers often are not management trained, so that you would try to avoid the situation where you have that confrontation because you've had previous conversations. And you need to have those conversations, because if you don't have them, then it becomes deep-seated, and that's when you get the outburst. But if somebody knows that it's not okay to come in late every day, so you've done it once, you've done it twice, and you have to intervene. You have to have, why are you coming in late, And it's not kind of an accusatory approach. It's, let me help you. Maybe you don't have transport, maybe you have children to take to school.
That's right.
Discuss a situation, and in that way you diffuse it before it happens.
Yeah. And that's getting to the root cause of why an individual is doing what they're doing. And I think in leadership positions, if we're not understanding why our country, if we want to bring it to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, why is Trinidad and Tobago doing what it's doing? Why are we all angry? Why are we all lashing out? And I think we all need to start doing some personal introspection, because your example is just a reflection of what's going on all over in different degrees. I mean, that's a bit extreme, yes, but who says that's not going to happen in a workplace? I mean, I may be sitting at my desk doing something and suddenly somebody comes in with a gun and starts shooting. It could happen. And I think we need to all wake up to that call that we are all contributing to the violence in society. And we need to understand that that word violence does not necessarily mean guns.
Exactly.
It means other things.
And it could be attitudes. You know, somebody in a workplace may be deemed to be more popular than others.
Absolutely.
And they get cold-shouldered, and they take it personally. How do we encourage somebody not to then, again, return that kind of incivility to people who are uncivil to them?
Yeah, I guess we need to have ongoing conversations
Absolutely.
in the office.
Group
Those have to be
meetings.
easier, yeah.
Group meetings are critical. We need to be able to understand situations. We need to be able to understand how somebody feels. We need to be able to discuss with each other these things.
Yeah. We need to really encourage conversations in the office.
And how do we do that?
Has to be structured. Has to be structured. I know.
When you say structure,
It has to be part of the
every day.
culture of the corporation. In the same way we can have discussions about safety and other issues, we have to have discussions about how we relate to each other.
But if I'm being told in a situation where there's no structure, I'm being told that non-violence in my approach generally in life is the best adoption.
Because, you know, not all Trinidadians like structure. I mean, we like to sit with maybe over lunch. Why can't managers or have lunch with your employees? Because, of course, not all employees work in an office environment. We have factory workers. We have workers who are on the road in those big lorries. I mean, they must be so aggravated and have so much road rage with the kind of work that they do. We could sit and have a drink with them, not necessarily a soft drink, and hear what their issues are. I mean, violence to your body, right? But, you know, that's taking your point, but not necessarily in a structured environment in the office, but we could go onto the factory floor. There's nothing wrong with that, and let's hear with our people what's going on. Friday morning, we dress down, we buy a set of doubles, we maybe have the soft drink, then the red solo, and we sit down and say, fellas, let's talk, or ladies, let's talk, because we have to be careful in an environment that we are gender appropriate. And let's hear what people are saying. And I think when an individual understands that you're truly listening, Andy, and you're truly hearing what I am saying and how I'm feeling and what's causing me to do what I'm doing, then I think I will open up to you, and maybe I might be a better employee or person for your company, because I'm going to embrace it. So I don't
Perhaps, Andy, we need to probably not talk about the workplace at all. Maybe we should start before the workplace, and you should learn how to cope with these situations in school, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps if you start at 5,
Oh, yes.
then
Yeah.
by the time you get to 25, you should be able to deal.
But the reality is that it doesn't
But we
happen.
don't-
A lot of
we're not
times
doing that.
You end up in the workplace as you are, and you have to manage, and you're being encouraged not to reply violently to violence coming towards you. Somebody who you have a boss who screams and yells at workers, and it's not the accepted thing to scream and yell back at that boss. How is that person encouraged to negotiate a situation like that?
You mean the screaming boss?
Yeah, the yelling boss who
Yeah.
talks down to people.
It's really good to help him get in touch with what got him to that place in the first place, you know? I find...
I mean, the person who is the victim of that can
Or the
play a
victim.
role in calming down the boss.
You know, in active nonviolence, we
Yes.
have with the symbol, God, so long I haven't done it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not behavior I would accept. You know, screaming at me, that wouldn't work. I'm sorry, we'd have to have this conversation another time. So that's the, but at the same time, there's the hand reaching out to you, you know, connecting with your humanity. You have to do it at the same time. Remember, nonviolence isn't passive. So the boss screaming at me isn't to be accepted, really.
Yeah.
But it begins, once you start connecting to that humanity, though, you know.
Yeah, because you don't want to be accused of being disrespectful, you know, again, you know, in spite of, in the face of the provocation coming your way.
Yeah. You know, so with all due respect, that is really hurting me, what you're doing now. You know, can we speak another time when you're less calm? He might fire back with something else, but at some point it would get a place where it would begin to subside.
It depends on where the screaming takes place. If it's behind closed doors, then you would have to deal with it in the way that's suggested. But,
what if it's out?
But there's some bosses that do it out in the open,
yeah.
and that's harassment in the workplace.
Yeah.
Oh, indeed.
But you may take other steps in addressing it, but for the moment, the encouragement is not to reply in kind, because among other things, you can lose the job.
And you know
end
that
up with
expression, don't fight fire with fire.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have a call on the line. Good evening.
Hello, good evening. Afternoon to the panel and
Good evening.
Andy Johnson.
Yes.
What tempted me to call is the fact when you all spoke about a screaming employer screaming to employees. And as the lady was indicating, you know, you put up your hand, in other words, trying to say stop. You're not saying anything, you're just visibly showing that it's to be stopped. And then you find out that the man is not going to stop. I had a situation of that many years ago. I have been an employer for years also, and I've been in management and the whole works, and I have had an employer of mine bawling at me. And I told him, I said, excuse me, I said, you're bawling to the wrong person because I really not going to entertain this behavior at all. When you think you could speak to me. And immediately he indicated, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, you are fired right now because I don't want you in my employ. Because I can get somebody else tonight to sit in your position. I said, well, here, you know what? Get the person now, never mind tonight, because I don't wish to be in your employment any longer. Because this behavior that you're thinking that you could put on to me, what happens to these other folk who are underneath me working to give you your lifestyle and bringing in the money into this company, and you are sitting fat doing what? Bawling and screaming who you wish, when you wish. You don't even know if these employees have food to put in their mouth or can feed their families or whatever. I said, you want to know what? I wish you the best in life. And as far as I'm concerned, the sooner everybody walk out on you and leave you to collapse, better. So be it. That was my take on it. And in this situation we have presently in Trinidad, where employers have the field day of picking up anybody at any time and inserting them into anybody's slot when they move the person, because we have that ability now. That's why so many people can be removed from their jobs, because many others, even more qualified ones, are sitting on the outside waiting to get the crumbs that the person is giving out. And that's the situation we have in Trinidad right now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. There's one thing he said that I wanted to pick up on in the way in which he responded to the boss. Well, you know, everybody should walk out and the business should crumble.
Yeah.
And is that something you commend?
That's a kind of violent response, I guess.
So I'm asking you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could understand, because he was angry, he was frustrated, he was humiliated, you know, all those three things. None of us like as human beings. So, of course, we have to take Diane's example and hold out our hand and train our bosses that maybe that's not the way that you should react. Practically, though, I'm not sure that it will work, but we can only but try, and we have to continue to try in the non-violent way.
Well, precisely, because that's the basis of these discussions, about reacting non-violently to provocation and the violence coming at you.
I want to say something, Andy. You know, when I did this, it's really a symbol. You know, it really represents the strategies or the parts of the strategy. that are to be employed, I wouldn't recommend you go up to your boss and do this, you know, but in effect,
But why not?
your response,
And then he or she might ask, what is that? And you'll explain what this is. You know, wait a minute, but can we talk?
Let's talk.
Yeah,
So,
I think so.
yeah.
All right, well, give it a shot.
But you were saying you won't recommend it. Why?
I just like that you remember that your reaction to a person who is, you know, shouting at you or whatever should be, you know, you need to stand tall in your personhood. I'm not going to take that. And, you know, we can meet about it.
Yeah.
I think the caller was talking about, again, going back to my distinction between small businesses and large businesses.
Yeah.
Caller was obviously talking about a small business.
I think,
Because
yes.
in a large business, the screening manager wouldn't last very long, because there would be avenues and processes and structures to which you could address that.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that caller was able to walk away from that situation because financially he felt confident in himself that he was able to go somewhere else and get financial support for himself and his family. And not everybody's in that position right
Absolutely
now,
not.
and some people have to tolerate the employer acting in that way. And perhaps we can reach out to employers through this show to say, look at yourselves. You don't necessarily have to treat people that way, because you might be the root cause of what's happening in the country. So maybe you can change.
Yeah.
Because we all have a responsibility.
And how do we encourage the employee to remain on the job given what their circumstance might be, rather than leaving the job and finding himself or herself on the bright line in a situation that they will end up with?
You could write a letter, I guess, Diane. I don't know if that's accepted. You know, you walk away. Perhaps in the cool of the moment, you can write a letter and say, X, Y, and Z was the situation. Perhaps maybe we can talk about it when you feel comfortable for us to have a chat. I mean, I don't know if that's a
nice approach.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
that's the humane. That's really very humane.
Well, I guess nowadays we send an email because we're electronic, but some form of written communication to say, well, I wasn't happy about what you did. Perhaps we can meet even in a small environment and talk about it. Other things is maybe I could talk to my peers and say, well, how have you dealt with it?
Yeah.
Because the boss is shouting at everybody, it would appear at that thing. How did you deal about it? Can you help me deal with this situation? Because perhaps I was angry that day and that's why the boss lashed out at me. I don't know if that's also something to do.
I'm remembering my first job at the Central Bank many years ago. I'm straight out of high school. And there was a supervisor that I and all my other young buddies were perceiving that she was really a bully and tough on us and so. And I remember, I guess not savvy enough to first have that discussion with her, but I went to her manager and I said, probably we should all, naive I tell you, probably we should all have a meeting because so-and-so doesn't seem to be working well with us. But you know, you have to do something. You have to do something and not necessarily, you know, a young person, I could have told her off on the job, that type of thing, but there's something else that you can do. And nonviolence is about creative means of trying to get to a solution as well. So we have to just dig down and figure out what can we do in this situation, and you're suggesting ask a couple of people and get to it from that point.
And from a lot of what you've been saying here, it is not that difficult. Sometimes the answers treating with these things are sometimes too simple for people to believe that they work.
We don't do it often enough, why we think it's not simple.
Yeah.
We're not confrontational in the true sense of the word, you know. You know, to come to a person and say, I really do not feel good when, you know, you stand in front of everybody and shout at me. I'm sure there's another way that you can do it. And probably in an unstructured way, probably. Can we go for a walk and talk about that? You know, probably not now, you know, give the person a little time to think about it.
And perhaps it's a lot to do with culture as well, because in different cultures where I've operated as a diplomat, shouting at the employees is the norm. I won't call continents or countries, but it's to do with a lack of democracy in the country, perhaps. It's to do with a cultural situation where the boss is the master and the employee is the servant.
And how do you counsel somebody not to respond in kind?
You cannot in that situation. It's part of a culture.
Yeah, we have another call. Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I called earlier on, and what I wanted to let you know, well, two things I wanted to let you know.
Go ahead.
One is on the subject that I brought up concerning my boss bowling. Eventually what happened is that he realized that he couldn't cope anymore, and what was happening is because of the situation in the country, it was getting to him, and he could not cope with what was happening in the country, and he sold the business and went to Australia to live because he could not cope with having to be employing people and feeling that nobody could do the job the way he can do the job, or he prefers to do the job, or whatever was in his mind. And the other thing I want to let you know, I worked in England, and it was amazing when I worked in England. I took a factory job for a short period of time because I was coming back to Trinidad because I used to go up and down. And it so happened I said I would go and do this job. So I went and I went to a temping company, and they put me into a factory. That factory had a lady as the supervisor, the floor supervisor. That woman had a whistle. And when you appeared there in the morning, when it was morning time to have a break, she would blow the whistle. When she figured the break was finished, she would blow the whistle. When it's time for lunch, she would blow the whistle. When you're sitting eating, she would just suddenly come and blow the whistle again. One day I bought myself a whistle bigger than hers, and I blew the whistle, and she could not believe how the people got up and went to their jobs. And she hadn't blown any whistle, and she was confused as ever. And that fixed her. That was the end of her and her whistle, I wanted to know, in England.
Thank you very much, sir.
And he wasn't
a unique.
Yes, a very unique response. I think we're all getting whistles tomorrow for sure. I think one thing I would like to leave though is the respect. I think if we truly, truly respected each other, regardless of where we came from, what we look like, what we do, then maybe we would not treat each other in that violent way. Whether you are a factory worker, you're an administrative assistant, you're a manager, whoever you are, I think we need to start learning how to respect each other again, because we may have lost that a little bit or maybe a lot in our...
And tell us how, those of us who don't know how to arrive there, with approaching life with respect for fellow humans.
It's a bit late when you get to the workplace.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. You would have learned how to respect in school. You would have learned it at home, so that.
Well, presumably.
Well, hopefully, and the ones that don't learn that, we have to find a way of treating with those.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to get at. How we do that at that stage, because if we take the principle, the philosophy that it's never too late once there's life.
Yeah, well, I go back to the point I made before. You must have some kind of individual in the workplace that would treat with a person that has a problem, a psychiatric nurse, a psychologist. You must have a structure in which an employee feels comfortable to go to a person like that or refer to a situation where it would be addressed. You must have an overriding culture where the non-violent approach takes place. And you must have continual group meetings, communications outside of structured group meetings, but communication has to be the essence of it.
Yeah, I'm wondering from what you're saying, I'm thinking about how we are told to accept that redemption is always possible. I'm using the term, probably too strong a term for this, but in a lot of cases, you know, we see, I'm sure you know people who you thought would never change from the way you knew them, and you saw something that you thought was miraculous. What happens in cases like that?
I would say no, that is exactly what nonviolence is based on. Believing that, you know, it is possible, you know, that your love for yourself and your love for that other person will indeed touch them, especially when it's within the structures that Terry is describing. It is accelerated. But
I think, Andy, sorry, Diane.
No, go ahead.
I think we are all worthy, and maybe we don't believe that we're worthy, so we allow people to do the bullying. We allow the people to bring us down. But if we truly believe we are worthy, then the internet is full of examples of how we can deal with nonviolence. That's certainly how I've learned it as well. So instead of going on social media and spreading horrible stories about people in the workplace, you could go on to this and Google up these things, and it will actually show you how you can be, or give you ideas on how you can be.
And we could find avenues for
exactly on
inspiration.
And make yourself feel worthy. What's wrong? We're all wonderful people in Trinidad and Tobago. This is a wonderful country to live in. Well, sometimes. But we are wonderful people. And if we truly believe that, and we truly believe in each other, then we can make it work. But we've got to believe that.
In a large organization, Facebook is a speak out box. You'd be surprised what's in there. And employees must feel that whatever's in there will be investigated, and it is.
Yeah. How do you address Suzanne's point about making somebody feel worthy in a situation
this is where a trained individual comes in. If somebody is perceived by somebody else to have a self-esteem problem, there's a way to deal with that. There's someone that person can go to. If there's substance abuse, if you feel that there's something happening to that employee at home, or if there's some abuse taking place, there should be someone that you can go to treat with.
But I suspect, I mean, you have had opportunity to counsel people who may not be subject to any rules and regulations in a workplace, but you feel that you can reach there. Where do you get the inspiration from?
It's a feeling about somebody. It's how you perceive yourself, first of all. How do you perceive yourself as a senior person, so that even people not within your employ, if you see something happening with them, you say, and I've noticed you come into work late every day. What's your story? You know, encourage a conversation and try to steer them on the right path.
I like that notion about making every one of us feel worthy, because indeed we are. And that goes a long way. In getting somebody to feel different about themselves, feel better about themselves, and therefore you don't hit back because you're hit at, and you find a different way to deal with it.
Absolutely. That's the best we can hope for, you know. You feeling that you're worthy and connecting to the humanity.
Self-esteem issues, interrupting you. Self-esteem issues don't happen in the workplace. They happen before you even get to the workplace.
Yeah.
So that there must be some way of addressing this. Looking at an individual and being able to help that individual.
In more knowing organizations, there are employee assistance programs. When, you know, there are lots of small companies out there, and they can't necessarily afford to have somebody on staff, but they can subscribe to one of these companies where they can make interventions, such as the types that you're describing, and employees can get to help and start, you know, growing in their own esteem. And so,
you know, I wanted to raise the issue of it's another police story, really, of the police officer who felt violated twice by the same colleague. You know the story? And it is being said now that he wasn't reached in a situation where he could have been? How do we prevent something like that from happening and to get to him, given the fact that he felt his life was destroyed and he was apparently determined to avenge it, to avenge the wrong?
Well, I think taking Terry's point is that if his colleagues may have seen that he was going down, I mean, your actions every day, if you're not coming in and saying, hey fellas, what's going on, everything all right, you know, and you're laughing, and suddenly you're like this, or you're walking around and you're not talking to people and you're frowning all the time, then something wrong. And as you say, find out from your friend what's going on and allow him or her to say, and allow him the space to feel safe for me to say, my wife leave me, which is what happened in this situation. My wife take my house, and you don't judge me for it, because particularly in a male environment, I don't want to be judged. I want to feel safe. I want to open up myself to you, and I want you to not go and spread all my business around the place, and not necessarily that you're going to help me, but just allow me to say sincerely how I am feeling inside. And I don't know that we nurture that kind of talk, and it can happen on the factory floor. It can happen in amongst ladies in the powder room, and they, instead of chatting about other things they can chat about, they can talk about how they're feeling and not think that you're going to go and gossip about me. So that's an example.
And even if they attempt to gossip about somebody else, that the employees are comfortable enough to say, please, let's not go on down that road.
Yeah, two things here. One is that in some of the reporting about it, it suggests that he was talking with some colleagues, but it didn't lead to the kind of sort of positive resolution that should have been the outcome on it.
Invariably, when there's some kind of upheaval or tragedy, death, break up with spouse, break up with significant other, there's a need for an intervention. And in spite of the fact that somebody, how are you feeling? Like cool?
Yes.
You're not cool.
Yeah.
If you tell me you're cool, you're not cool.
Yeah.
And that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, and the other part of it is that to what extent we buy into the idea that I will tell my story because that helps me. Whatever you do with what I tell you, that is your business. You know, there's this saying, you know, in a certain community that what I tell you is what is the garbage I take out. If you take it up, that's your problem. And so we should feel more empowered to put out our garbage. Is that something that works for in some cases? Just the simple act of
we need to have in every organization someone whose job it is to counsel.
Yes.
We have to move to that point.
Yeah. But that's in the world that as we want it to be.
Yes.
But we're living in a world where that isn't the case. But
So
we try
start putting
to
the garbage out, but
Yeah.
suggest you don't even call it garbage. Start having the difficult discussions. That's what it means when you say nonviolence begins with me. I have to start talking about what's tough for me.
Right.
I have to start putting it out there. The place becomes safe
Yes.
when others looking on would realize, probably I should do that too. Yeah, so start putting that thing out.
And when you say that to people, you encourage them to see that
To share
and
their
that-
own.
and that is a pathway to feeling better about oneself, and that solves a whole set of problems for itself.
It will begin to solve problems. It will begin to solve problems.
And you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Why don't we start with having a conversation like this in the workplace
Yes.
over lunch?
The idea is that it is not difficult. I mean, all we've talked about for the better part of the last 55 minutes, they seem to be so simple, but sometimes the simple things escape us, and we expect. Like expressing gratitude. I used to think that something has to be magnificent for me to feel grateful about, until I learned that I could feel grateful for getting
Just
up in the
being
morning, for being, simply being.
And do you know how nice it is when somebody says genuinely, good morning, Andy, how are you today?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? 6 words, and it makes me feel great, and I don't. So it's just little things like that. That, you know, when you see someone, hey boy, what's going on? I mean, why do we have to say that? Hey, how are you? Did you have a nice day? How was it coming into work? Did you suffer road rage like me? Things like that. So you're relating to the person rather than being aggressive. Just one other thing I wanted to add, though, is maybe we could have a little prayer room. We don't have to have a room that's religious denomination, but just a quiet place where if I have got angry and I'm feeling like this and there's nowhere for me to go, I'm going back to my cubicle or my machine that I'm working on, but everybody's looking at me and I can't release. Is there somewhere in the workplace where I can go and just diffuse, you know?
And I feel as though there's a sense in which once we start on that journey about nonviolence, it feeds on itself.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because people are sitting and waiting on it. They're waiting for it. We pent up and just the opportunity to start breathing and conversing and connecting.
That's right.
We're waiting. They're waiting.
And we begin to feel better about ourselves.
Indeed.
One person at a time.
How do we convince people that that's the way to go?
I guess we just have to start it. We just have to start
And we hope
it.
through these programs that we're encouraging our viewing audience as well to try it out, one person at a time. On our Facebook page, Nonviolence Begins With Me, sometimes we have little suggestions on how you can look at these issues and help yourself, help your family members, your loved ones, and give us suggestions on how we can do things to be non-violent, because we all have to learn.
Yeah, it will be wonderful if, you know, a number of people who are looking on at the program today can go and start a conversation. You know, yesterday I did so and so and so, and I probably should have gone down a different. Yeah, I should have gone down a different road.
Yeah.
Just start.
And it doesn't mean, Terry, that we can't be and shouldn't be critical, but we do it in a manner not to denigrate, not to degrade.
That's what a conversation is. It's being frank, but being respectful, and expecting the person that you're having the conversation with to respond. Unfortunately, some of us are not trained in that way, especially the male of the species. We're not trained to have conversations, but you learn it after a while.
We're trainable.
Well, but yeah, because you know, one of you talked earlier about the female boss, and now you talk about the male bit, but because at least the theory says that female bosses are tougher than male bosses.
Well, I threw the bananas.
Well, we need to talk about different types of bullying and different types of harassment.
Yes.
The male boss would probably scream and cuss, right? But the female boss would be probably the backstabbing type, and the type that would give you a bad report, and the type would talk behind your back. I mean, that's not a gender statement. That's empirical in my case. Women tend to have different approaches.
But it's violence.
And not only to men, to other women.
And what's the non-violent way of responding to that?
Well, first recognize that something is surfacing in you and you feel like hitting out or abusing your power or withholding privileges or unfairly giving. Recognize it and step back from that and ask yourself, how can I do this differently? My responsibility is to do it as a bigger person.
And we're there to help each other move forward, you know, and if we're not on the journey together, you know, as we say, we're on a marathon, and a marathon is not a sprint, it's a journey, and we're all on this journey together to become non-violent. We just have to help each other on that journey.
Yeah, and it takes one
step at a time.
And it's not often, doesn't cost. I mean, there are benefits to be reaped from it. An owner of a business would have happier employees. People feel safer. They work harder. You know, they think it's unproductive activity, but it yields productivity.
And the unspoken benefit is that we feel better about ourselves, and therefore we
contribute fully.
And then, Andy, the next generation also
I was
benefits.
just going to say
Because if I'm happy, then my child is happy.
And we haven't introduced that. We haven't introduced the generational differences.
Well,
how it is.
Next.
Yeah.
Probably next time, because
And the cultural
that's the only time we
differences,
have
whether you're
Suzanne
from
Morgan.
country or town. How,
Yes.
we haven't, we
South
haven't,
or north.
Yeah.
Yeah, Terence Walker, Diane Joe, that's it.
All across the